March Madness? More like mid-madness. We'll get into that and a lot more this time on Iceman and Coach. Ah, yes, March Madness, that time of year where all of us degenerates get together to watch one of the best events in all of sports. Welcome back to Iceman and Coach, everybody. This is the Iceman, Matt Freites, and across from me is the coach, Brad Powell. We are fresh off a trip to Charlotte, North Carolina, where we met for the first time. So welcome, buddy.
Iceman, yeah, good to be here, man. It was nice to get that first meeting under our belts and enjoy a nice long weekend in Charlotte, the NCAA tournament, which we'll get into here soon. Back home, which I started battling the allergies on our last day or so in Charlotte. It's been kicking my butt a little bit this week, and so I'm a little medicated on the decongestants. Goodness,
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, and no, doing well, man. It's opening day of baseball season, which is exciting. All the teams around the country are full of hope. I should say all the fan bases, anyways, right, of the season ahead. Only 161 more to go, boys. So we'll get there eventually. But no, happy to be here. Happy to get an Iceman and Coach in, which is always a pleasure.
162 more to go or 161 more to go, depending on if your team had a postponement. And we will be here to cover not one of those probably in any shape or form unless something happens to it. But yes, we did go to Charlotte, North Carolina, and we did get to watch 6 NCAA tournament games. And while I'll admit it is my favorite sports day of the year, just because, or sports weekend, I should say, just because it's action unique to sports and just unique to college basketball, there's nothing like it. But I will say this, the 6 games that we saw, while didn't take away from the experience, they just absolutely sucked.
Yeah, they weren't great, which, I mean, in a sense, obviously is a bummer, right? Because we were so excited. Now, it was still, as I've told everyone who's asked, it was still a wonderful experience to go, obviously, to meet and hang out, spend the weekend there. We saw some good basketball teams. We just never had a chance to see 2 of them on the floor at the same time, it seemed.
Nope.
And, but we had some cool experiences. And I mean, I was really surprised at the number of fans, and not just fans of the teams that were playing there, but it became very apparent that it's sort of maybe a thing to represent your school, whoever that may be, whether they're participating or not. And we were surrounded by folks just like you and I who were meeting up with friends of theirs or family to come just watch as fans without a dog in the fight. And so it was fun to take it on from that perspective. And because the games weren't terribly close, we didn't really get the experience of getting to watch these fan bases on some sort of an emotional roller coaster, which would have been fun. I think we were looking forward to that, and it never happened. Other than maybe our Michigan State friend behind us who came out of the gates pretty hot on Saturday evening during the Michigan State North Carolina game, but he cooled off pretty quick.
I was going to say he fell off really, really quick about toward the tail end of the first half. But I think the NCAA tournament is unique for a sporting event, and maybe there's some others like it. Maybe a golf event like the Masters, the U.S. Open or something, where I think a lot of people will go there and just being there is part of the experience. The NCAA tournament catches casual fans, in my opinion, probably better than a lot of other sporting events because of the fact that there's bracket challenges and people just like to watch the haves versus the have-nots, or the perceived haves versus the have-nots. And I think when we went, we did meet up with a lot of people who were just there. Either they had been there before and they were back meeting with friends and they didn't have a dog in the fight. And that was kind of refreshing to know that we weren't the only people who were just there to be there. So I think that the experience, even though the games could have been better, we did see some good basketball played by at least one team on the floor. We saw a few moments of what really makes the NCAA tournament a lot of fun, when these fan bases go on a little bit of an emotional high or when there's a perceived comeback happening. But for the most part, it was all chalk. And that's kind of been the story of the tournament, in my opinion. And I will say this for the two of us, though, it did lend, I'm talking about our game experience, to a lot of good conversations that we're probably going to resurface here about the tournament, about selection, and there's a lot of other stuff to cover. So I think we're going to be totally fine, even though those games could have been better. It just means that next year, all buzzer beaters.
Right, and we joked that, Pittsburgh was the place that we should have gone, right? Because they had Oakland there, they had the overtime game with NC State, and then was it double overtime between Oregon and Creighton? So, now our luck, though, if we would've gone to Pittsburgh, Wagner would have beat North Carolina, and Charlotte is how it would have worked out, but, no, you're right, it did create a lot of good conversations about different things, the types of things that fans talk about, when it comes to selection and stuff like that. And then, I think we talked about on Selection Sunday when we did the watch party about how there were a lot of bid stealers, or there were going to be a lot of bid stealers. And I think that did sort of, dare I say, dilute the quality of some of these potential, Cinderella teams you get, these 15 and 16 seeds, that you'd like to see get in there and maybe give one of these power teams a run for their money. And a lot of those conferences, the best team in the league didn't win the tournament, and so we were left with a lesser opponent, I guess, in some cases, which, took away from the potential for these Cinderella teams. And right now, I think NC State is the lowest seeded team currently in the Sweet 16. I think they're at 10 or an 11?
They're an 11. I think they're the only one that is seated under 5 in the entire Sweet 16, which
I think
in
Clemson might be 6.
yeah, they're
They're
6.
yeah.
In recent history, though, that's been uncommon to see that much chalk. Now, a lot of times, and we discussed this, you'll see chalk when you get to the Final Four. You'll see a little bit more of it the deeper that you get. But normally in the Sweet 16, you will see a couple of good stories, at least in recent history. And that's exactly what you're talking about and what you alluded to is the fact that I think because there was a lot of bid stealing, the madness of March actually took place leading up to the NCAA tournament. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. This is how the tournament is decided, how the tournament field is decided, is by these conference tournaments, by these resumes with at-large bids and all that. And there is an opportunity for teams to get hot, like NC State, win 3 in a row, 4 in a row, 5 in a row, and get to the tournament. That's the whole point of the conference tournaments outside of making money. But when we looked at St. Peter's, who a couple years ago made a run, that was not the same St. Peter's team whatsoever. That was a bid stealer. Wagner had 7 active players. So there's no way that they're going to be able to make any noise against a North Carolina who is clearly very good after what we saw. And then a lot of the other bid stealers, a couple of them got some wins, but even the mid-majors that should have been better didn't get some of those wins we were hoping for. McNeese looked absolutely horrific, but maybe that's not them. Maybe it's the fact that Gonzaga is peaking because Gonzaga then took out Kansas like as if they weren't even there, and Kansas couldn't miss a bucket in the first half, and I notoriously said that, didn't make a bucket the rest of the game. So it's just March, and I think that that's kind of where we are, is that there's no predictability to it, and we just have to roll with it. Some years it's going to be like this. Some years it's going to be like a couple years ago where we had an 8-9 matchup in the national championship. That's kind of what makes it fun.
Oh, it absolutely is. And what we have right now left in the Sweet 16 are the highly talented teams. The number one seeds have performed very well up to this point. Haven't really been challenged much. And so you have the big time teams with a lot of talent performing well. And you have a combination of that and the teams that got hot at the right time, like the NC States, and even, Oregon didn't make it to the Sweet 16, but they were in a double overtime game with Creighton, and they went on a run to win the Pac-12 and get themselves into the tournament, and they wouldn't have been otherwise, right? So that I think is what you sort of would expect. If it weren't for all the upsets we've had the last couple of years, I think in most cases you come into the tournament expecting, hey, like we're going to see, obviously when it starts to whittle down, we're going to see the best teams and we're going to see the hottest teams. And that makes perfect sense, right? But we've been really, maybe our perception's been messed with a little bit the last few years by some of these runs these lower seeds have gone on.
Oh, totally. I mean, we now expect it. And
Yeah.
before that, it wasn't anything that was a guarantee. I mean, a 16 had never beaten a number 1. And now in the last, 6 years, we've seen 2 of them happen. And I think we now come to expect these 15s and 16s. And not to say that they're not good basketball teams, but I think that it has to be the perfect storm for one of these teams to even win one game, let alone go on a run to the Elite 8. And that's why it doesn't happen very often. That's why a 15 will get one win, and that'll be considered a success for them. But it is what it is. I just want to talk about one upset because there was one upset that got a lot of people talking. And it got a lot of people talking because obviously Oakland was a fascinating story with that guy, Jack Golke, who just throws up threes. But on the other side of that is John Calipari. And we talked about coaches that seem to falter in the biggest moments. And John Calipari, I don't think is one of them. But when you coach at Kentucky, and now, in the last few years, I think even since the pandemic, he has had very little success in the tournament. This is a guy who I think is entering his 16th year at Kentucky. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. And he's won national titles. He's been very, very successful. But the spotlight is on him now after this. And he's had a lot of excuses, I'll put it that way, about the age of his players versus the age of these mid majors and stuff. But ultimately, you're Kentucky and you should be having the best players and you should be winning these basketball games. So I wanted to ask you if you think that it's fair, the criticism that he is getting, if you should look at the whole resume, and is John Calipari maybe in or getting to that Nick Saban territory where the new age of college basketball is going to engulf him and pass him by and he should get out while the getting's good?
I think the criticism he's getting is fair because just making the tournament has never been the standard at Kentucky, right? National championships are the expectation, and being knocked out of the tournament early the last couple seasons certainly doesn't reflect well on him, and especially the teams that he's lost to. And not taking away from those teams, but those are teams that Kentucky is supposed to beat, plain and simple. And there's truth to what he says. I mean, sure, it is excuse making, I suppose, but yeah, I mean, he's going out there with a roster. He had a lot of success with these one and done type players, these rosters with 18, 19-year-old kids that were highly talented, and it would take them maybe half of a season or so to really get them to play together, and then they'd go on their run, right? And now I think with NIL and the transfer portal, but maybe more so NIL, you have kids willing to stay in school a little longer at some of these other places because they're making money and maybe try to improve their uh their professional profile and prospects before they leave college because you'd had guys that would leave right away as soon as there was any semblance of them being able to make some good money because how can you pass that up? Well, now these guys are getting the money, maybe not at the same level in some cases or in most cases, but they're getting paid pretty good to play the college game, and so they're going to stay and play it longer. And then, of course, the story with a lot of mid majors has always been the togetherness and the chemistry that they have because most of those guys have played together for 3 or 4 years. But even now with the transfer portal, like that's not always the case because the best guys get poached away, and you have to basically reinvent your roster every season. But at the same time, you have guys that come from higher level teams and come down to a mid major maybe that are really talented too. So it's really an interesting dynamic. And as far as should he get out while the getting's good, kind of Nick Saban style, I don't know if I subscribe to that so much because I feel like Cal's one of those guys that's always sort of operated in the gray area a little bit. Before NIL was a thing,
What are you
was
talking about?
I think, yeah, I mean, exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, I think that Cal's always been one of those guys that has maybe had that reputation of, sort of doing whatever it takes to get the guys he needs. And maybe now it's harder for him to do that with, maybe NIL levels the playing field to some degree. I mean, I know everybody's always paid players, but now with it being much easier to do so, maybe he's lost a little bit of an edge that he had.
I kind of wonder if maybe he's lost an edge in his coaching because I don't think talent's the problem for Kentucky. If you look at the class that they brought in this past year, I think three of the guys they brought in were in the top 25 or something like that. So talent really isn't an issue. The transfer portal shouldn't be much of an issue because you would think that there are people who want to play at Kentucky. And I think that Kentucky is still a desirable destination for a college basketball player, no?
Yeah, I would I mean, it is. It's a blue blood, right? And when you talk about if you were to ask someone who doesn't really pay attention, like, "Hey, name me a school that is really good at college basketball." I think if they were to rattle off 3 or 4, Kentucky is gonna be one of them.
Absolutely, but it also highlights the fact that the culture of winning. I mean, Kentucky is not a job in which you can have any type of rebuilding. And I will say this though. I mean, a lot of programs would take what John Calipari has done as success, and there's a lot of them that would, but Kentucky is just a different beast entirely. But let me ask you this. There's been a ton of coaching moves, obviously. A lot of these mid-major coaches moving up, and even guys like from Washington State moving up to what they perceive as better jobs. And if the Kentucky job were open, would that be similar to the Alabama job where it would be like everybody would want that job?
I think so. Just because it is. I mean, you're stepping up into one of the biggest programs in the country, especially in the world of basketball, and it's going to pay well, of course. At the same time, though, it obviously just not unlike Alabama football. It comes with a lot of other things on the periphery that you have to deal with and people you have to appease. And maybe that sort of thing isn't for everyone, but I think that if the paycheck's large enough, they could probably get on board with whatever they needed to do. So yeah, it's right up there in that conversation with the Dukes, the Carolinas, the Alabama football. Um, it's in that same conversation for sure.
Do you think that the allure for these coaches, and I'm thinking of specifically, like, let's take Darren DeVries, for example, and we've talked about him on Braves Talk, now former Drake coach going to West Virginia. Obviously, the pay bump is a big part of it because who doesn't want to get paid more to do the same job? But I have to think that the allure of extra resources has to be a factor where it's like, look at what I did here. Imagine what I could do with more. And I know a lot of people don't like today's NIL transfer portal stuff because it does take away that loyalty. A lot of guys aren't as willing sometimes to get through adversity with a team. And there's a lot of pros and cons to it. But for coaches specifically, I can understand why you're a guy like DeVries or maybe a Josh Schertz who's like, wow, I've been really successful here. I love it here, but I'm not only going to get paid more, but boy, they're going to throw a bunch of resources at me. And maybe if I can continue to recruit the way that I have and work the transfer portal, now we can make bigger, stronger, faster teams and stuff like that. It doesn't always work out that way, but the allure of that has to be appealing.
Oh, for sure. I mean, now let's not forget. I mean, it's all relative, right?
Sure.
Obviously, you're coming from the Missouri Valley, where the resources are not the same as they are in the Big 12, and but you're at least on the same level as your peers, and now you're taking a step up. And yes, you're going to have exponentially more resources, but so is you're going to be around the same level as everyone else in the league, relatively speaking. So I think that that's where it is maybe a more of a coaching thing, right? And let's see, like Josh Schertz dominated Division II basketball for over a decade before he ended up in Indiana State, and we see what he's done there. Obviously, I mean, so there's no question the guy can coach. It's just a matter of him having to go through the steps of getting to that top job. And from everything I've sort of gathered, it sounds like it was kind of a Louisville botch job, that really kind of led to him not ending up there, when
No,
it was
come
all said and
on.
done.
What are you
And so,
talking about?
and there's a lot more to that story, I think. But you're right though. These guys want to see what they can do when they have the ability to go out there and recruit the best players that they can get, and see what they can do with that talent.
Yeah, and right now is transfer portal time, which is interesting. Like I don't know who came up with the idea for the transfer portal to open. Wasn't it like on selection Sunday or sometime around then? And it seems like it's conflicting where you have schools that are participating in the NCAA tournament and then they've got to basically recruit their own players or some postseason tournament. But I know again, there's a lot of vitriol sometimes about the transfer portal because we as fans love our teams. We love to think about or fantasize about players staying. But for the longest time, players weren't able to move if the situation wasn't right for them. And now, of course, it's opened up the door for players to just leave at any time because they want to go get that bag. And it's not a perfect system. I think that hopefully it's headed toward being a little bit more regulated, but I don't blame the players necessarily for wanting to get something more because they see these coaches doing it at the drop of a hat. And loyalty to the school is one thing, but like these coaches are supposedly supposed to be loyal to their players, and so few of them actually stick around to be loyal to them. Where it's like, again, I don't fault a coach for taking a better job. Josh Schertz could work his entire life at Indiana State, make more money than me for sure. But when there are jobs that want him that he could make more money at and be more successful and obtain what you always say, that generational wealth in some form or fashion, I can't necessarily fault the players for wanting a little bit of that when historically they have been unable to do so without losing a year of eligibility.
I agree, and I think, I mean, at some point they're gonna this stuff's gonna get figured out and sort of uh leveled out to some degree. Some sort of parameters are going to be put around this at some point in time. And I think what happened is they went from being like, okay, these guys are, these schools are making money hand over fist um, off of these players, and it's not right. They should be able to, off their, it's ridiculous that X school can make however many dollars off selling so and so's jersey. Like that player should get a piece of that sort of thing. And they've kind of taken it and they've overcorrected in a way by just making it wide open, and it'll eventually correct itself. I have a feeling, and because I just don't know what it. I mean, I just trying to think of what is like college football and college basketball going to look like in 10 years if it keeps going exactly as it is and nothing changes.
It's going to look like a
Um,
pro league.
it's gonna be wild, and, um, at least I feel like it's gonna be insane because it's just an arms race at that point. It's who's got the most money, and, we've talked about it with other sports and in other situations where these boosters, they wanna win. They wanna win badly, and winning is so profitable to these schools that they're gonna make sure it happens too, and they're gonna put whatever resources they have into it, and so as that those numbers, that money gets just creeps higher and higher and higher, it's gonna be ridiculous, and it makes you wonder if, well, at what point in time does the money get so great that it does start to impact maybe some of these pro salaries even? Like, "Hey, like, if you want me to come to the NFL, like, you're gonna have to up the ante a little bit because I'm getting paid, 5,000,000, at, Duke," or which is that's not realistic, but I'm saying it could get to there at some point, who knows? Um, and yeah, I think I was telling my dad this, we were talking about, I think that things would be a lot smoother if we had one or the other. Just had the transfer portal where players could move freely, but you didn't have NIL where they could be enticed to move because of money. Or you had just NIL, but not the portal, to where you essentially only have to recruit that kid once, and he doesn't have the freedom to just walk out the door anytime that he wants to. I mean, if you kept the old rules where they have to sit out a year and that sort of thing, maybe, but um, I get it. It's hard to, as fans, we want to find a way to solve for it because it makes it hard to um, as fans, we all develop that relationship. We never meet a lot of these players in most cases, but we develop that relationship. We feel like we know them, right? We're invested in them, and it stinks when the roster turns over. 50 to 60% of the roster turns over year after year, and it makes it harder to do that as a fan, harder to kind of invest in these players and watch them over the entirety of their careers. And so, um, it, so as fans, we want to fix it, right? But at the same time, like from just a pure like objective perspective, like I can't find a good reason why these guys shouldn't be allowed to uh, capitalize financially on what they're doing and what they're doing for these universities, and the freedom to transfer. That's a little different story, I guess. There probably should be some sort of limitations on that, I think,
Yeah,
but
I think you're right. The
uh,
limitations is the hardest part because I think it stinks or did stink when you would transfer because not every transfer is created equal. Sometimes the transfer is because that player knows he's not going to get any playing time. And a lot of these kids are going to go pro in something that's not basketball. So they want to be able to find a situation where they can play and maybe open up some avenues for them in something other than football. I don't know. I mean, so having to sit out an entire year would take away a lot. It was I think the players were losing more in that equation when coaches don't have to do that. They can just swiftly go off and start recruiting for this new school. It's like what I said about Buzz Williams, how Buzz Williams was a Hokie until he wasn't. And then all of a sudden he was all about the Aggies, right? And it's like, man, it's cold, but it's kind of how it works. So we will figure this out, I think. But you mentioned a word in there that is going to easily transition us to the next topic. And boy, it's a doozy. And that was loyalty, right? because loyalty, I think, in sports is important. We, the fans, want our players and our owners to feel loyal to us, to feel loyal to our city. And obviously, loyalty matters in our personal life. And the Shohei Ohtani, I guess you can call it a scandal, has been in the news now basically since we've been in Charlotte. I think it dropped maybe that Thursday, maybe that Friday. I'm not going to lie. There is more information out than there was when we first found out about it, but I know still nothing about it.
Yeah, I've caught bits and pieces of it, right? I mean, I'm hearing it, which it's all secondhand, I guess. I know that he did like a little press conference where he just made a statement and didn't answer questions, I don't think. But to me, it's, off of what I've gathered, it seems very clear that I think it's impossible that he was oblivious. I mean, the best case scenario for him to not get in any trouble is that this person who was, you know, a trusted friend, his interpreter, um, an employee of the Dodgers, all these things, just stole $4.5 million from him, right? Um, but I don't think that's the case, and it seems like that this guy might have just been the fall guy and the dude placing bets, and it's not like he just bet 4.5 million. He lost 4.5 million. He
Correct.
certainly won at some point. I mean, even the worst gambler is probably still going to win 40% of the time if they're actually trying. And so who knows what the full amount is, and one thing too that has to be you have to remember in this is sports betting is illegal in California. That's a state that hasn't legalized it yet. So there are legal implications to this beyond just like the morality clause when it comes to being a professional athlete.
It's it's so interesting. And I think, like, okay, so I struggle with a lot of what's been presented because I think I always have a healthy cynicism when it comes to situations like this. And there's so many things that have changed. The thing that bothers me the most is that the initial report, at least what I heard, was that the interpreter was fired because of $4.5 million in gambling debt. And all of a sudden, the story changed. It changed after a team meeting that was, by the way, closed off to reporters or any type of media. And all of a sudden, instead of him being responsible for paying off these debts, it's now, oh, I stole the money from Shohei Ohtani. And there's a few things that I'm struggling with, and maybe you can help me. You're my advisor here, my therapist in this regard. But it's like, I can believe Shohei Ohtani when he says that he didn't gamble on baseball. I'm willing to believe him at face value. I'm even willing to believe Shohei Ohtani that he didn't know that this guy that he has probably trusted with many things in his life since coming over here didn't know that this guy was transferring money out of his bank account. I'll even believe that. The part that I have a problem with is what bank is going to do this without the sign off of the account holder. And I got to think that Shohei Ohtani is the account holder of his own money, even if he has asked somebody else to manage it for him. I just have a real hard time believing that Ohtani knew zero.
You're right. And these, casinos, assuming he operated through a bookie, through a casino or whatever, um, they're not going to let you bet that kind of money without, if you or I walked in, and tried to get a $4 million line of credit at MGM to bet on sports, like they're gonna kind of like look at us funny, and then
Security
but
would
they're
be
gonna
there
look
in
into
a
our
heartbeat.
they're gonna look into like our financials and try to determine if we're good for it. And so that's the other part of it that's really strange is that at some point in time they would have had likely this guy had to be vetted whether by a bookie, a middleman, or a casino themselves. Because Los Angeles isn't incredibly far from Vegas. I mean, he could have been going to Vegas and doing this, and so I find it harder to believe that like Otani wasn't aware in that sense, but maybe he wasn't. I mean, if it was just like a shady bookie, maybe the bookie did know where it's coming from, but didn't care, um, because he was pocketing some cash off the deal, but uh, it's it's extremely strange, and you're right. What bank, what institution, is gonna sit there and just, like, let this happen, if it's not Shohei personally withdrawing the funds, and to think if I mean, if that guy would Shohei Ohtani is either the most honest, trustworthy, nicest guy on earth, or the opposite, maybe. What I don't know that there's any in between at this point. I mean, either he is completely um in on what's happening and is lying through his teeth in an attempt to save himself, or he literally is just so naive and honest that this guy just robbed him blind.
I think there's a lot of things at play. I think, first of all, I think that it's a fact that rich people, and Otani is rich by every objective standard, a lot of them don't know how much money they actually have. That's why I said I'll believe him that he didn't know that his money was being stolen, because it's very possible that he doesn't know how much he has. Because in my opinion, I'm like, how do you not know you're missing $4.5 million? Again, this is not like this guy placed a $40,000 bet. $4.5 million. This is a large chunk of change, again, by any objective measure. I'm also willing to understand that when Ohtani and a lot of international players come here, many of them have interpreters because speaking their native language is much more comfortable, and they can get in trouble speaking in English. And also, acclimating to American life is not easy for them, for a lot of them. Not saying Ohtani's in that camp, because I don't know the differences between living in Japan and living in the US, right? But I can understand him having a guy who handles that kind of stuff for him so he can solely play baseball. But then you also hear about the fact that they have this team meeting and Ohtani didn't know what they were going to talk about in the team meeting. I'm like, this guy just signed a $700 million contract. And if he's not the kind of player that's like, I want to know when shit is happening, then he doesn't have the temperament to be a champion, because $700 million, that guy should be told everything that is happening in the organization. And the fact that they're not going to brief him when they're going to talk about this in front of the team, that seems really strange.
Yeah, that's definitely odd. I haven't heard a lot about that necessarily, so I can't speak too much to that situation, but definitely bizarre that he seems so unaware of everything. Like I said, he's either so just naive and detached from everything other than just playing baseball, or he's in denial and total liar. Like I said, I don't know how it could not be one or the other.
If he's a total liar, this shifts to a completely different conversation about sports betting, players betting on sports. We've discussed it before, but if Ohtani is lying and he bet on baseball, literally the worst possible scenario that baseball could afford in any way, I think baseball could easily get through another strike before having the face of their sport. I actually did this with my wife earlier, and she knows who Ohtani is. And I said, okay, so you know who he is. You know who Mike Trout is because I talk about him. Can you name a third baseball player? And her answer flatly was no, I could not name a baseball player. Shohei Ohtani, whether he's American or not, is the face of Major League Baseball. Like, hard stop, the
Oh,
face of Major
absolutely.
League Baseball.
Yep.
And if he was betting on his own sport, good Lord. Like, Pete
Yeah, it'd be
Rose
terrible.
is if they're not going to ban him for life, Pete Rose better be in the Hall of Fame. That's all I got to say about that. But we've talked about it before because players have been nailed for making bets, and we have both been firmly on the fence of swift and punitive punishments for those things because the rules are clear that you're not supposed to do this. But we've also said, like, what would happen if it was Mahomes? And I never thought we would get there with Ohtani. I never in a million years thought a guy like that was going to be embroiled in something like this that is so strange. And Major League Baseball is investigating. They're not going to find anything, but my goodness, they better hope that some government agency doesn't prove that Ohtani bet on baseball because they are going to be so screwed.
Yeah, that would be bad news. And baseball's not a sport, not an organization that can really afford something, for something like this to happen.
Absolutely right.
And I tell you what, though, I am totally here for the Pete Rose Shohei Ohtani podcast
Absolutely.
that would fire up if Shohei gets banned and everything else. So that he'll have his interpreter next to him.
My goodness.
And yeah, I'm ready for it. Have you seen the clip where someone's like, "This is interesting"? It shows them in the dugout, and like you can tell they're playing a game to like get the ball, and like he's super pumped about like winning or whatever, and it's like, this guy seems pretty competitive. Like, I don't know, like, to me, just based off the little bit I've heard about it, and shame on me for not being, digging deeper to have more concrete details,
Will be our
but
best video yet.
I think it's not looking good for him, based off what, you know, the information I have consumed. I don't see a way, unless shit literally just gets brushed under the rug. I don't see a way this ends well for him.
Maybe it depends on what I think a government agency finds, but I think Major League Baseball is perfectly content, like putting it under the rug, whatever brushing it under the rug, whatever, sweeping it under the rug, because I don't think they can afford this. But this also kind of gets to another
Can
conversation.
you
But
afford let me ask this question, can you
go ahead.
afford to let it let's say if you're Major League Baseball and you know it happened, and let's say that basically anybody in Major League Baseball knows it happened, and you let it go, isn't that worse?
If people know about it, I'm saying that I think Major League Baseball, if they find out about it, nobody's ever going to know. It's going to be like, what did Roger Goodell do with Spygate? Burn the tapes, right? It's going to be something like that. Like, this is best that nobody ever knows what happened. You can file it under the conspiracy theory stuff, just like Michael Jordan retiring. Everybody thought it was a 2-year suspension for gambling, right? So I don't know, but baseball can't afford this because, and I know that I beat this drum a lot, but I think it's true. When you look at last year's World Series was the worst rated World Series. Now, again, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but attendance seems to be down, ratings seem to be down, the viewer base continues to get older, and baseball really can't afford to have their best player and the face of their sport, who people gravitate toward casually because oh my goodness, he pitches and he hits. They can't afford to have him be out for any extended period of time. And I just think that Major League Baseball, they're going to investigate it, or they're going to say they are, but unless a government agency forces their hand, I do not believe they have the integrity to actually tell anybody about it.
Which is so, hypocritical considering baseball is one
Steroids?
of these unwritten rules, respect the game, all this bullshit that they peddle, and, so I totally agree that this would be devastating to baseball, if it is found that he did bet on baseball and he gets banned and so on and so forth. It'd be absolutely devastating. I can tell you this much though, I would have a lot of respect for MLB if they did if issue a severe punishment, even knowing what the implications would be.
Here's the thing, right? You just got me thinking about this, about baseball and the hypocrisy. So you mentioned like the unwritten rules and how weird people get with bat flips and other shit like that. Major League Baseball knew steroids was a problem and turned the other cheek because the home run chase of 97, summer 97, summer 98 saved the sport. Literally saved the sport, because coming out of the 1994 strike, man, people did not want to watch baseball. And then all of a sudden, home runs go up, offense goes up, and Major League Baseball is profiting off of it. And then Barry Bonds gets close to a sacred record, and all of a sudden now it's a problem. And then you get the aughts and the late 2000s with all the congressional stuff. And now people who were on the Mitchell report are getting in because we've all kind of realized, I guess everybody was doing it. Major League Baseball turned a blind eye. And so if they turned a blind eye to that, they're definitely going to turn a blind eye to this. Even though I think, and this is maybe hyperbolic on me, but you know me, I'm not against sports betting, especially for the individual. You, do whatever you want. If you lose all your money because you don't know what you're doing, it's on you. It's not on me. But I worry that the temptation for sports players and the people that are circling kind of in their immediate orbit is too great. And I worry that it's going to erode the foundation of the integrity of sports in general. And then people like us who just love to watch sports, are we going to want to watch sports if we know that the literal fix is in?
Oh boy. This is something that I mean, betting has been going on for a long time, long
Sure.
before it was legal. It's similar to NIL, right? Like it was always happening under the table. Everybody knew it. Everybody knew a bookie. The difference is now it's more accessible.
Sure.
Um,
Out in the open.
and yeah, and it's above board in some states. And so,
Good point.
maybe that the fact that it is more accessible increases the temptation because anybody can download the app on their phone and do it right there. Um, as opposed to having to know a bookie, trust a bookie to not out you to somebody and, obviously maybe get yourself associated with some unsavory folks and then get into, now they want you get in a little bit of debt. Now it's like, hey man, like, okay, like if you don't have the money, well, this is how you can help us. How about you drop a couple passes tomorrow? One of those things where I think though that the odds of that, if you're just, you're not getting involved with that community, if you're just betting on an app on your phone, right? So I do think that maybe in some way but obviously you're not going to be doing it from your personal cell phone either if you're a professional
If you're
athlete.
smart.
Yeah, I mean, so and that's why, in this case, if it did happen to be um something that Shohei knew about, he of course was using someone else, but um is it going to erode the foundation, the integrity of sports? I don't know.
Could it
And
though?
maybe, yeah. Oh, certainly it could. I mean, but there have been accusations for a long time across the board that a lot of these things are quote unquote rigged. I mean, someone came out saying that every football game in the SEC was fixed,
Oh God.
here recently or something like that. And so who knows, man? You know what? It may all turn into where it's like pro wrestling. Pro wrestling still it does really well, and everybody knows it's fake, right? I mean, fake in the sense of it is prearranged outcomes. It's sports
Yes.
entertainment, right? There's
Yes.
still tremendous athletes and so on and so forth, but sports entertainment, and really it just depends on how you want to look at it. I think we as sports fans hold um, sports in a kind of a sacred place a little bit, and so it would be really it'd be devastating, I think, to a lot of people if you really couldn't trust that what you were seeing on the field was legit. But
Y-
at the end of the day, it would probably still be entertaining.
I would like to think so, but I think what worries me is that I know that these athletes make a lot of money, but the idea that they can help themselves, right? If they feel like they're not getting paid what they think they should be getting paid, and it's like, wait a minute, I can place bets on myself and actually help determine the outcome. And it's like one person does it. I mean, I don't know if you heard about this, but the Temple basketball team playing through their conference tournament with point shaving allegations, I think it was, on like the whole team. And they're making this run. They almost made the NCAA tournament. And it's like, where's the line? What happens here? And it's like, if Ohtani, who seems to me to be a pure guy, but then again, also one of the most private people out there, like I don't know anything about him. Not that I should know anything about him, but most of us know something about these players, and we don't know anything about this guy. This situation is really strange, and it just opens up this conversation, I think, about whether the players and the people around them are susceptible to getting in trouble with this stuff and eroding the integrity. I'm not like gloom and doom saying it's going to happen. I hope it doesn't. I think that players are too competitive to throw games, but it starts to become a trend. The players now that have a different work ethic than the players 20 years ago, 20 years from now, are these players going to feel the same competitiveness, right? Are they going to want to just lay out for their team? I don't know. I mean, maybe they'll go into the business for themselves, but just something that I think about when I see this situation, but I think this is far from over.
Oh, it certainly is. And I mean, this isn't going to be the last gambling scandal that we hear about.
No,
This is something that unfortunately is going to be probably fairly regular. What if the Temple basketball team, what if they tanked mid-season so that they could bet on themselves to win the A10 tournament, and then they almost pulled it off, right?
maybe that's what it was.
Uh,
That's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, well, there it is, right? It's like, wow.
drive
So
the number up.
we could get paid more than the NIL is paying us if we just tank the season and make a run. Now that's hard to do because there's a lot of factors that go into that. But I'm telling you, like, these are the types of things that make me wonder. And it is what it is, man. We will be here to cover that, I'm sure, just as speculatively as we have here. But I want to I want to go back to basketball. We're going to talk about women's basketball. Now, the last time we talked about women's sports on here was, I want to say May of 2023, around the time of softball season, which I think is happening now. we got in a lot of trouble, but got a lot of subscribers out of it. But let's talk Caitlin Clark because she's the talk of the town. She's the talk of the town for a lot of reasons, but right now she is 2 wins into her NCAA tournament run. They're in the Sweet 16. She's getting a lot of criticism for how she has been behaving because Iowa hasn't looked as crisp as I think that people expect them to look. And Caitlin Clark, I think, has been forcing it because I think she's looking to win this last national title, tons of exposure, and people are getting on her because she's getting visibly frustrated. And what triggers me about this is the idea of people saying she's supposed to be a role model for the kids. And like, I can't with that stuff. And I know you agree with me that sports figures, no matter how pure, no matter how great they seem, your kids should not be looking up to these people. They should be looking up to you.
All right, this is what I want to say to those people. Most of you clowns can't keep from losing your shit if a 16-year-old kid screws your order up at McDonald's, okay? And you're criticizing a 22-year-old young woman who is invested like the majority of her life into being really good at something and is getting frustrated in these games that have the highest stakes of any game she's ever played in at this point in time. She's in the public eye. Of course, she hears, yeah, she gets plenty of praise, and there's plenty of people that do look up to her and admire her, but there's just as many haters, and she hears all that stuff too. And just like any other person, when you hear someone that is a hater that's running their mouths, you want to prove those people wrong. And you could sort of, which just isn't a good thing to do, but you could shift into maybe letting emotion steer the ship a little more than like focusing on the task at hand. And I think that's what we're seeing a little bit, right? She's getting a little emotional. I think just with outside noise, the frustration about how the team's playing, and I think you're going to see those sorts of things. Is it stuff that like you want to see necessarily when you watch a game? Do we want to sit there and see these young athletes like hold it together a little more in tough moments? I mean, I think you'd say yes, because we think it's a valuable skill to develop, is how to hold it together in the face of adversity, um, and not react emotionally. But everybody has a breaking point. We all get frustrated, and that's what we're seeing. And like, I don't, I mean, it's just the same with the freaking, like, was it LSU and South Carolina, that scuffle,
Oh, yeah.
no
Yeah.
one likes to see that stuff. But like, again, these are highly competitive people that have invested countless hours and years into this thing, and they're playing at a high level. And at some point in time, tension and emotions are going to run over a little bit, and it might get ugly. And that's what happened. It doesn't, I don't think it makes anybody involved a terrible person. Um, there's a lesson to be learned there. It's a teachable moment, right, for those people who are involved. But it's not, oh, these people, they're terrible role models. I tell you, you know what? You know who's responsible for being a role model for your children? You,
Thank you.
dummy.
Thank
Like,
you.
be a good parent, be a good person. You're the person that your kids see every single day. Don't pass the buck off to some kid that they watch on TV once a week. That's ridiculous. And you're seeing this person for 2 hours. If you want to admire their athletic talent and their skill, all about that. Do that all day long. I'm not saying don't look up to them for the athletes that they are. And yes, there are plenty of athletes out there that happen to be pretty good people too, which is wonderful.
Sure.
But they're under no obligation to be a role model for your children.
No, 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 no. Like, remember when people were outraged that Tiger Woods had extramarital affairs? And it's like, folks, he is not here to make you feel good about yourself. He was paid to play golf, and he's flawed just like the rest of us. But Caitlin Clark is in an interesting position because she's obviously breaking records, and she's breaking men's records. And I don't want to make this political, but I think there are a lot of people who watch a woman do that and probably feel a certain way. I'm not going to say that they don't like it or whatever, but we talked about the criticism that she's getting with breaking these records, and people are like, it doesn't count. And it's like, what? Why can't we just be happy and appreciate what we're seeing? Caitlin Clark is being put up on this pedestal as a role model because, and for better or for worse, she has been identified as a reason why people are watching women's basketball. That inherently is a good thing. But it's also a lot for her to put on her shoulders, on top of having to be the greatest player on her team, on top of having to shut up the naysayers who say she isn't as good because she hasn't won a championship. Well, winning a championship is hard no matter how easy Gina Auriemma made it for all those years. And now she's got to add being a role model, and all of these parents who tell their daughters, I want you to be like her. And that's fine to an extent, but it's also a lot for Caitlin Clark. And so she's running through this tournament knowing that she's leaving, and she's trying to win. And we all press in situations where we want to impress. When we have a job interview or we have a big project that we're trying to work on and we want to get a promotion, whatever, we press and we get hard on ourselves. And I get it. You and we as fans think that athletes should be just stoic all the time. But I'm here to tell you that a lot of people said Tom Brady was a competitor, but Caitlin Clark is a whiner. And that's where there's no consistency in the argument. She's in a lose-lose proposition, and I kind of think it sucks.
It does suck, man. And what else sucks is as a species, we are terrible about this. I mean, I think we've done this throughout history since the beginning of time. Of we are the ones that put these people on the pedestal, and then we are in such a hurry to knock them right back off, and it's just it's insane, I mean, like, you think back to even, like, the Romans, it's like they put these emperors, in place, and the next thing you know, they're murdering them, yeah, just to do it all over again, and I think that it's just absurd, and, not to just keep banging this drum, but I'm not saying you have to like the behavior of anyone. You don't have to agree with how these professional athletes behave. You can dislike it. You can express your opinion. You can do all those things, of course. I'm just saying that the expectation that they have a responsibility um, to be these role models, I think that's flawed. I don't think that's the way it should be. I think that that's um, that's you as someone who can be that role model trying to pass off that responsibility.
And the comment that we have here about people who are criticizing her should also be criticizing the dozens of men in the NBA. But I think that brings to a point the fact that when men do this, a lot of times, oh, they're a competitor, right? It's competitive. And for her, she's getting pinned as this role model when it's like, because again, she didn't ask to be a role model. Now, nobody does ask to be a role model, but I think she understands the responsibility that she has that she didn't ask for. In I think it was the first round game where the coach of the team that they played, her daughters looked up, loved Caitlin Clark, and like she went over there and talked to them. She understands the assignment. She does the right things in a lot of ways. And guess what? She's human and she's going to do the wrong thing. But on the other side, right, you have Kim Mulkey, who constantly seems to act out in these ways, and people give her a pass because, well, she wins. And it's like there's just no consistency whatsoever, right? And yes, a lot of the things that we talked about are overblown, like the South Carolina fight and all that kind of stuff. It is what it is. These things are going to happen. I'm just saying that people are hating on Caitlin Clark. Probably the same people who are saying that her records are illegitimate are also asking her to be a role model. Go F yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Kim Mulkey's case, she's a character. You know what I mean? She's like Bobby Knight or Lou Pinella. Like she's a character and
Sweet Lou.
successful, which helps a lot too.
Oh, of course.
And so it's it, it it's the same stuff. I mean, Kim Mulkey, she's the same way, just highly competitive, and wants to win. And I'm sure that some of it is shtick, just to maybe maybe that's part of the way that she can get an edge with her team and motivate them or whatever. Because at the end of the day, like whatever you got to do to motivate these players to play at their highest level, to give you an opportunity to win a championship, that's what these coaches are going to do. And a lot of them have different ways of going about it, and they know what buttons to push and what works for them. And again, I don't have to like it. I could think it's stupid, but at the end of the day, that's just it. I just think it's stupid. I can choose not to watch it. Um, Kim Mulkey doesn't know me shit.
Absolutely not. And I can guarantee you that if she ever saw you in person, she'd probably punch you in the face just because she didn't like the way or the cut of your jib. But I will say this before we move on. I kind of like it a little bit that Kim Mulkey is sweating, just a little bit over this impending article that we have no idea what it's about. She obviously knows what it's about, and she tried to get out in front of it, but I kind of found it funny because I'm like, I'm kind of here for a little bit of Kim Mulkey sweating things out because I think she's used to making other people sweat. I'm just saying.
Oh, definitely. And it's funny because, it's like, hey, this article's coming out, but it's not true. Or her saying that, like, she's getting, 48 hours notice. Well, no, you've had
Total bullshit.
2 years notice.
So here for
And
this.
but also her talking about it ahead of it, trying to it's similar. It's in the same line as someone coming to you and saying, hey, no offense, but
Yes,
well, then they're about to say something offensive, right? It's in the same vein as that,
with
where
all
she's
due
coming
respect.
out and saying like, "Hey, there's going to be this thing, but
Not
it's
true.
not true." She's trying to discredit it before anybody's read a word of it. And why, at the end of the day, if you don't do anything wrong and you're a fairly high character person that lives with integrity, um, you don't have to defend yourself against those things. Your reputation will stand on its own. And I mean, I'm assuming whatever it is probably doesn't reflect very fondly on her.
I'm sure
And
it's not going to be an article talking about how she, uh, like volunteers at the Boys and Girls Club.
oh, probably not. No,
No.
I mean, I'm very curious what it is. And I will
Oh, me
say this
too.
much: it is sort of, and I maybe journalism's it's a business, right? You're gonna get a lot of eyeballs on a story like that this time of year. The only shot I'll take at the writer is that, of all times to do it right in the middle of an NCAA tournament run is kind of shitty. Um, but again, it's a business. I get that, and you got to get eyeballs, and that you're going to get even more eyeballs when it's right in the middle of the biggest time of year for the sport. And maybe it's just a coincidence that it just happens to be this time of year, but it probably is a very uh, unwanted distraction for the LSU women's basketball team.
I mean, 2 years. Like, yeah, you had 2 years to answer it. And now all of a sudden it's like I had 48 hours. I love it because it's just, I believe whatever that article says because it's like she already came out and said, "Oh, this isn't true." And it's like, I don't even know what's in the article yet. So clearly she sees whatever is in it as being damaging to her reputation. And so she's trying to get out in front of it. But I just said, I'm here for somebody making her sweat just a little bit. I have no idea what the article will be about, but I just thought that the press conference was brilliant. All right. So one more little thing that's kind of local before we get to the end. And I had a friend who is a listener of the show text me a message that he received from Ted Leonsis, who is the owner of the Washington Capitals and I think the Washington Wizards. I know the Capitals for sure. Washington Capitals are a pretty popular team here in the DC area. They won a Stanley Cup within the last 5 or 6 years, kind of got them over the hump. And last year, there was a lot of talk and chatter of a new arena to replace where they currently play. And it was actually going to be 10 minutes from my house. No joke. They're going to put it in Alexandria, Virginia. And this was all the talk of the town. Well, last night they emailed the entirety of the fan base to let them know, oh, by the way, after all of that stuff, we cut a deal with the city of DC and the mayor of DC, and we're going to stay in the district. We thank the governor of Virginia and all of the people that we worked with for their service, but thanks, but no thanks. And I just found this to be so fun because it highlights where I am now. I do not believe, I'm so cynical now that every owner of every franchise cares nothing about the city, cares nothing about the fans. Winning is even secondary. They will do whatever they have to do to pad that bottom line. And this is a perfect case of that. Hey, DC's not going to give us what we want. Let's go talk to Virginia. And then DC says, no, we'll give you what you want. Sign on the dotted line. And my friend was kind of upset about it. And I'm like, you just have to get to the point where you're like where I am. The owners don't give a shit about you.
No, they don't, and it's they only care about the fans as long as it is, like you said, padding the bottom line. And it's the same even to circle back to the MLB, right? The MLB is a business at the end of the day, and they are going to make whatever decision in the situation that's best for their business. And they talk about fan experience and things like that. But the only reason they want to improve fan experience is so more people come to the game and stay longer and spend more money. They don't
Correct.
actually give a shit about your experience.
No.
They only care about it as long as it benefits them in the end. So, we forget that sometimes, that these are businesses at the end of the day who want to make money. And it sucks because you do have, you know, we get so emotionally attached to these teams and these players, and it jacks with your emotions. And to even to get to get the city involved, and um, and especially in the whole political climate of today, where you're talking about using taxpayer dollars and all that. I mean, it just creates so much vitriol amongst people. And then, but as soon as the stadium's up, everybody will be rushing out to see it with their credit cards in their hands, man, ready to swipe and just keep the wheel turning.
I'm not gonna lie, I was really happy that the Capitals were gonna be like 15 minutes from my house because I'm like, hey man, I might even actually go to a game or two. You never know. It's right up the street over here. Plus, my property value is gonna go sky high because obviously it's in the county that I live in.
See, now
So
you're thinking about it like a business. Look at you.
absolutely, like,
INC Sports Arena.
oh, so it's funny you mentioned that because I'm going to be coaching my son James's softball team, or not softball team, t-ball team, and they sent an email out about sponsorship opportunities, and I was like, oh my goodness, that would be hysterical because they're like, you can pay. It was like $200 to have a patch on the uniforms. I'm like, a little INC patch right on all the t-ball uniforms. I'm like, how great would that be? What a great opportunity that would be, that we'd have now 5 listeners on the show instead of 2. It'd be great if we could double our numbers, but I only bring this up because we've talked about relocation before. I feel like we've done a pretty good job. We talked about the A's about this time last year. We talked about the White Sox. And in both of those cases, we said they are steeped in history. The A's were in Oakland forever, won World Series there. The White Sox have obviously been there for a really long time, and it doesn't matter. Like, it just doesn't matter. I think that for the White Sox, staying in Chicago is the move because I think they're not going to leave. But the A's, it doesn't matter. They're going to move to Vegas because that's where the money is. And it's not like the Capitals were going to become the Virginia Capitals. They're still going to be the Washington Capitals. It's just a matter of where are we going to be able to put this arena down that is going to be able to maximize the amount of money that we're going to make. And every fan who's watching or listening to this just needs to understand that the owners are not about a winning franchise unless the winning franchise makes them more money. Technically speaking, they should, but not always.
Right. And then all the history and tradition, if anything, that hurts the city's position, because that passion and attachment to the history of the franchise is going to lead you to basically giving in to retain all of that and to hang on to it. You know what I mean? Like, and if you don't think for a minute that these owners are using that against, um, these cities when it comes to negotiating for these stadiums, I mean, if they aren't, they're foolish. I mean, I guarantee you they sit in those, in those boardrooms or wherever, and they say, do you want to be the mayor that's responsible for the Chicago White Sox leaving Chicago? And I mean, I guarantee you they say things like that. And hell no, you don't want to be that person at the
Never
end of the day.
considered that angle of it, actually, that the tradition being married, like if you're a politician and you have been in this city for the longest time, like I don't know much about the governor of Virginia, but what I do know is that he's a Republican, and I do know that the mayor of DC is a Democrat. And I think it's great because I'm like, this super rich person, the owner of the Capitals, doesn't care. Doesn't matter what his politics are. Whatever politician is willing to give me what I want, I will do that, because he's not married to the idea of being in DC or Virginia. It doesn't matter as long as they have a place to put down that is financially beneficial for them. And you're right. I think that if there are people involved in these negotiations, and I think this is why the teams ultimately win these negotiations, is because they come at it from the sense of a business person. Like, let's take the Marlins, for example, the former president who I listened to his podcast. He did all the negotiations with the city and the county for the new stadium, and the taxpayers paid for it. And it's because he was negotiating from a baseline of business, not from fandom, not from wanting like this emotional base. And I think that a lot of people, when they have been in a place for a long time, you're right, they get emotionally attached and they want that team there and they will do whatever it takes. And that includes screwing over the taxpayers.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, tale as old as time, right? When it comes to politicians.
Oh man, this has been fun. I mean, we're talking about a whole bunch of different stuff here, and it's given me nostalgia vibes. Do you want to go back and do something we haven't done in a long time, my man?
Yes, sir.
Iceman stat of the week. It's been a really long time since we have done this, but it used to be something that was a staple of the show. And hopefully now that we are getting away from college basketball, we can this summer bring back some of those old things. So, Coach, are you ready for a stat about the NCAA tournament?
Oh, of course, man. Like 100%.
Okay, great. So this includes 2024, but this is the list of schools that have had the most NCAA tournament appearances without making a Final Four. I'm going to give you all of them and see if you can guess the number one school. Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so we have Utah State, Western Kentucky. Both have made the tournament 23 times without making a Final Four. Alabama and Creighton both have made the tournament 24 times without making a Final Four. Tennessee, who we saw twice, 25 times without making a Final Four. And tied at 29, Missouri and Xavier at 29 appearances without a Final Four. At 31 appearances, can you name the school? It was a very surprising school.
Name the school with the most appearances without a Final Four. Very
Yes.
surprising school.
Yes, I was very surprised.
My goodness, man, this is gonna be tough.
Of course, there's like 300
I don't want
schools
to
to
think.
pick
I
from.
know. Well, I'm saying by you saying surprising, it makes me think that I don't know which part of it's surprising. The fact that it's 30 whatever appearances, or the fact that this team has never made a Final Four.
So all of those
Um,
schools that I named, would you give me that you at least associate loosely basketball with them?
Sure.
That's the school at the top is a school that I don't think of as a basketball school. That's why.
Okay. All right. Um, Texas.
No, it is Brigham Young University.
Oh my goodness.
Way out of
Wow.
left field.
I was
I
talking
know.
about them at work today, actually.
Look at that. It's almost like you knew. But I don't think of BYU as a basketball school. I think they were a 6 seed this year. I think they were one of the ones who got upset. But 31 times without making a Final Four. I mean, some of those other schools, Alabama, Tennessee, like they've had periods of success. Creighton has obviously been in how many Sweet 16s now, but never made a Final Four. BYU just kind of surprised me. So when I was poking around X today, I saw that and I was like, ooh, that one actually seems good because it even surprised me.
Yeah, that's a really good one, man. Definitely relevant right now. Maybe is the Final Four. Maybe it's the Final Four. Was it on Sunday at one point in time? So that's why BYU never plays.
That's a good point because I think you did say that the tournament selection committee had to schedule BYU so they couldn't play on a Sunday, but they always play.
They were supposed to be a 5 seed. They got moved from them and Gonzaga got switched purely because of the Sunday factor.
And how funny is that? Because Gonzaga, I think I saw a stat. This is not an official stat of the week, but I think they're making their 9th straight Sweet 16 appearance, which is kind of bananas.
I still remember the first run, man.
Me too.
Just like it was yesterday.
I remember it because I told you when we were on this trip that I played in pep band, and I remember when they had that upset to get to the Elite Eight, and I was actually at the Providence Civic Center with the band during the high school championship. So I remember that very, very clearly.
That's awesome.
Yes, this was back when they actually just showed scores and you reacted to scores. You didn't actually, like when we were there, you got to see the actual game. So it's a lot different, or was a lot different back then. But yeah, so surprising. But the Sweet 16 is happening now. I don't know many of the results, but by the end of the weekend, in the brilliance of the NCAA tournament, we will have our Final Four, and it will be what it will be, my man. So before we get everybody out of here, an old-fashioned, crisp, but fruitful episode and very packed episode of Iceman and Coach. Do you have anything that you would like everybody to know, or just anything that's parting?
Yeah, so real quick, just a couple scores. We did have an upset. Number 6 Clemson took down number 2 Arizona 77-72. UConn handled San Diego State, and North Carolina only up 2 right now over Alabama with 9 to play in the first half, and the Illinois Fighting Illini out to an early 3-0 lead over Iowa State. So that's going to be one fun to watch and follow on my social media with all the Illinois people. They're going to be losing their minds.
Ryan
Again,
Leskis.
Ryan Leskis, wonderful, wonderful show on the heels of a really nice trip to Charlotte. And we talked a lot about what to do next time, right? Next year, other sports experiences. So hopefully doing some sort of sports experience will be a yearly thing for Iceman and Coach, and maybe even growing it with a few other people to come along. Hope everybody enjoys the holiday this weekend, and obviously the basketball that we're going to get to take in, because next weekend's the Final Four, man, and then it's going to be over, and we're going to be on to the dog days of summer with baseball and start, football, free agency, the draft, so on and so forth.
And much like last year, I thought that some of our best content was during the summertime before we got to football. Obviously, football is a lot more fun, but there is something about trying to get deeper into these other kinds of sports. But you're absolutely right. Final Four is upon us. The Masters is upon us. The golf major season is here. There's a lot to look forward to. On Monday evening, we will get back to Braves talk, as the transfer portal news has been swirling with the Bradley Braves, as you know. And one of our viewers right here, the OG, Rick Powell, will be on that show as well. Come on Monday. I'm not sure what time yet, but just make sure to stay tuned for that if you are a Bradley fan. And you know what? If you want to talk to us, give us a take, anything, call or text the show. 703-718-6314 is the number. Doesn't matter. Let us know. We love to hear from the listeners. Follow us on social media. If you don't know how to find us, listen to another episode. You can find it. We're all over the place, whoring ourselves out to every social media platform that we can whore ourselves out to. I want to thank everybody for taking the time tonight, taking the time in podcast. We love all of you. Hope this finds everybody well and safe. And Coach and I will see you next time. This is Iceman and Coach.